Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is our outfield preview part 2. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. If you just tuned in for this episode, welcome. Part 1 is the episode before this. That will be helpful if you're looking for a lot of talk about outfielders going roughly in the first 100 picks or so of really early drafts. Your more foundational outfielders are discussed on that episode. And there was one player. Time became a factor for us at the end of the episode. One player with a top 100 ADP who is not part of our last conversation. And by the time people get to hear this podcast, he may play for a new team, and that is Bryan Reynolds. And I think the interesting thing about Bryan Reynolds is that even if he does not get traded by the Pittsburgh Pirates, the supporting cast is probably getting better in Pittsburgh. They got young players emerging to take on larger roles up and down that lineup. So it's possible that the counting stats will even be a bit better than they've been in recent years as more and more of those players start to show up on the big league roster. But Reynolds threw us for a bit of a loop last season because early in the year, it looked like there was some legitimate skills loss. He recovered, put together a pretty nice campaign, hit a career-high 27 homers, chipped in those 7 steals as well. Didn't do it with the usual great batting average. The projections point to a player with a slash line much like what we just saw in 2022. Is that a fair place to put expectations, or do you see a case for him to maybe split the difference between the 2022 slash line and the 2021 and 2019 slash lines?
Well, I suppose you would normally regress that barrel rate back to the 10% that he showed in 2020 and 2021, except that 2022 showed the deadened ball for the full season. So I believe this is the deadened ball version of Bryan Reynolds. If you look at the Bat X that just came out recently, you see that he is projecting even more of a regression in the power department back to somewhere kind of in between 2021 and 22, where the batting average is a little bit closer to 2022 and the power is as well, but the 2022 and the power is back to where 2021 is. So 274, 23 homers. Steamer has 266, 24 homers. I don't really see a reason to quibble with either of those. The one thing that I don't like is that long sort of fallow spell. It just... And then I talked to him about it, and he was like, that's just baseball, man. And, I struggle with this sometimes because it's like, am I going to let what the player says color my opinion of him? And I think I always do, and I don't think that I wasn't necessarily saying, I'm not saying he was being rude, and because he's rude, I don't like him. And then I don't like him as a player. There's just a suggestion that he didn't identify exactly what went wrong and he didn't make an adjustment. Now, he may have and just didn't want to tell me about it. So, but I will say that looking through the various numbers and looking through the various swing heat maps and stuff, it wasn't obvious to me what change he made. But it still makes me nervous, right? Like that thing happened. Like he had a really bad strikeout rate. And he was really bad for like 2 months. I think that as he gets older, there's just going to be more and more periods like that until, the year that he's out of baseball, it's one season like that. So I just see, when I look at him, I see a guy who's solid everywhere, but I worry sometimes about the carrying tool. If you look at his center field defense, it's poor. He's probably not a center fielder. He's being shopped as a center fielder, and that's why they might sell him, because maybe someone will buy him as a center fielder, but I don't think he should be a center fielder for much longer. If you look at his plate discipline, it looks good. He has a good walk rate, but it's mostly passivity. He doesn't really discern balls and strikes all that well. And if you look at his swing strike rate, it's getting worse, and it's really not that good. It's about league average or a little bit worse. So if you look around, you're like, oh, he's very league averagey. And he ended up with 2.9 WAR. What if he's just kind of a league average guy going forward? In any case, he doesn't do anything well enough for me to be like, this is why I'm drafting Bryan Reynolds. Maybe I'll draft him as an oatmeal guy if the price is right. But I see other guys in this range that I like. I know why I'm drafting Byron Buxton in this range. I know why I'm drafting Stephen Kwan in this range. I know why I might draft Tyler O'Neill in this range. You know, I don't know why I'm drafting Bryan Reynolds in this range, just to sort of tread water and keep the line going, I guess.
It's fair. I think the hardest thing for me to grasp with Bryan Reynolds is that for his career, he is 26% better than a league average hitter. It looks oatmeal on the surface, but I think that's where some of our issues with the outfield pool have been coming from, right? Because with the deadened ball, with production on the offensive side coming down, we look at lines and we're used to seeing stats that look a certain way that mean something. And this is actually very good for the run environment we were just in. There were plenty of slash lines we looked at throughout 2022, and we said, wow, that's actually 5% better than league average. That sounds horrible, and it's 5% better than league average. So I think Reynolds is sort of like the upper bound of this was actually a lot better than you think, given the circumstances of 2022. Now, I think your concerns about Reynolds, is he the kind of guy that you trade for in a dynasty league because you think 5 years from now he's still going to play at this level? Of course not. I think that's been clearly expressed in how you look at him as a player. For a real team, is a real team going to trade for him and give him that massive extension? No, they're going to say, we're acquiring you because we have you on our team until 2025, and then someone else can sign you and pay you for the long haul because we like you for the next 3 years. We don't like you for the next 8. Seems pretty reasonable.
Yeah, and for people being mad at the Pirates for lowballing him, I think I'd sort of outline the case for why I would not give this guy, $200 million or whatever.
Right. It's fine. I mean, hope he gets paid 80, 100, 150, whatever the true market is for him. I hope he gets every dollar, but I just think there are reasons to be kind of pushing back on Bryan Reynolds as a Mullins comp, right? Mullins can play center field really well. Reynolds can't. That actually makes a pretty big difference in the long run in terms of how those players are valued. But you're all over.
And in the ADP section here, like Gunnar Henderson, giddy out. Tyler Glasnow, yes. Mm-hmm. Wander Franco, lovely. Bryan Reynolds. I'm going to do oatmeal if I could have Wander Franco or Tyler Glasnow. No. Behind him, maybe there's a line, but still, Alejandro Kirk, he's a really good C1. Wilson Contreras, another C1 in a 2-catcher league. If you're not in a 2-catcher league, you're not into catchers up that high. Willie Adames right there, George Kirby. I mean, it is a place where there's a lot of pitchers where I might just go pitcher. But if Gunnar Henderson and Wander Franco are sitting there next to Bryan Reynolds, I know I'm taking one of them.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem for me with Reynolds. More about alternatives at other positions being more interesting than him. I think he's appropriately priced. I think you could draft him there and end up being pretty happy with what you end up getting at the end of the season. But the other outfielders going just behind him, you mentioned Tyler O'Neill. We've seen the StatCast numbers. They pop. There's power. There's speed. There were actually some underlying improvements, I believe, in his play discipline last year when we did see him. And I think the thing that was really interesting is that for having a leg injury, he was still stealing bases when he was out there last year. 14 for 18 as a base stealer in just 96 games. Tyler O'Neill looks like the kind of player that will run more with the new rules because he runs a good bit already. He's efficient, and he actually gets on base enough in good years. I think that 352 from 2021 may be an outlier, but he walked more last year than he did in 2021. He struck out less. Swung at fewer pitches outside the strike zone. I'm very much in on Tyler O'Neill in this range because when you think about it, just comparing him to Reynolds again, O'Neill was previously being drafted as a top 50 player a year ago. He has that ceiling. I think that was justifiable if he stayed healthy, and he showed flashes of why it made sense to take that risk on him in that range last year. So I'm actually very in on Tyler O'Neill at this discount.
Yeah, I particularly like the new strikeout rate. The projected strikeout rate of 28, it seems very doable. It's sort of splitting the difference between 2021 and 2022. And Tyler O'Neill, if he strikes out 28% of the time, he hits the ball so hard. In 2021, he had the best batted ball quality overall in the league, according to one metric by Max Bay, before he went to work for the Astros. And it's believable. He hits the ball really, really hard, and it's not just a barrel thing. He hits it at every angle very hard, and he looks the way he does. So, I think he could easily hit 240 with that 28% strikeout rate. And if you're hitting 240 and stealing 20 bags, it puts a lot less pressure on your homers, So then he can hit 20 homers and still be super valuable at that pick, or he can hit 30 homers and provide a lot more return for your pick.
Yeah, we talked about Kyle Schwarber on part 1 of the outfield preview. I'd rather just wait and go after Tyler O'Neill than go for Kyle Schwarber a few rounds earlier, even though Schwarber's home run output, he could out-homer O'Neill by 10, 12. That could happen again. I know the bags from O'Neill are a little more stable. I actually think the batting average
Schwarber is a lefty.
Better too. Mm-hmm.
But, it is all about cost, and options. But, how many – there's also the question, how many poor average guys can you put on your team? And you can't get Schwarber and O'Neill. I don't think you want to put both those guys on your team. If you do, you better have had an amazing run at the beginning of batting average guys.
Yeah, I think the limit typically for 230, 240 type hitters, 2 is reasonable. Maybe you can get away with a third if you build in that cushion. But the point of getting the elite hitters is probably trying to win the category more than end up in the middle. I mean, I don't know. I think that's generally how people like to play it. This range, you mentioned Byron Buxton. What are we doing with Byron Buxton at this point? Another year and some really interesting things. Of all the outfielders I put on the rundown for today, Buxton had the highest slugging percentage of the group, 526, 28 homers in just 382 plate appearances, still had the 6 steals, run production's good. They brought back Carlos Correa. A lot of things to like in Byron Buxton, but the major question is still unanswered. Can he stay healthy for a full season or something closer to a full season?
I'm really checking really quickly his returned value for last year. Because we all wanted stolen bases from him. We didn't get it. We all wanted a full season from him. We didn't get it. But I'm sure he wasn't a $0 player. So let's see what I've got for him. $7. Return the same as Giancarlo, Stanton, and Andrew Benintendi. More than Nick Castellanos and Tyler O'Neill. And Tyler O'Neill was being drafted near him. Mm-hmm. Above 0, but not what you paid for. Wait, what do you think an auction cost was? Like 25?
Yeah, mid-20s, I think, was a pretty reasonable number.
So you lost money on him. I think the closer that he gets to sort of paying $10 for him, the more I'm interested. Although it really does seem like we shouldn't be projecting him for a lot of stolen bases anymore.
That's the really strange thing, right? So even if you just do the super lazy, let's just multiply the games played, give them, their another third of a season. Okay, 9 steals roughly over a full season. He was 9 for 10 as a base stealer in 61 games in 2021. You mentioned he still runs really well. Part of the issue, he's going to hit a lot more home runs. He'll steal fewer bases because you hit a home run and they don't have a chance to steal any bases. You got them all at once. The strikeout rate jumped again, back to early career levels. I thought that skill had changed for the better, and I'm not sure that 30.4%, like he had last year, is actually coming back this year. The projection systems come in lower, and I can kind of understand it because he wasn't chasing pitches outside the zone the way he did when the K rate was a little higher a few years ago. So what a weird player. I didn't think this would turn out this way. Part of the batting average liability, Byron Buxton hit 244 on balls in play for his career. He hits 305. So I don't think he's as much of a batting average liability as you'd think.
They're really willing to push the launch angle in Minnesota. They were, as a team, they're a leader in the StatCast era in launch angle and fly ball rate. They've long had, Sano types and other guys, even Kepler, they've got guys who will hit a lot of fly balls, and I remember back all the way to Brian Dozier, who, hit 50% fly balls one of his years. So, I think this is a team that preaches hitting the fly balls, and, Buxton has now hit over 50% fly balls twice in the last 3 seasons. So I think that is a big part of why his batting average on balls in play is low. But there is sort of the siren song of 2021. I don't know if it's a siren song or just, the appeal. If you took 2021 and made a full season out of it, you'd get a 40-20 season with a 300 batting average. And in that season, he did everything right. That's one of the best combinations of sort of ground ball, fly ball, barrel rate, max EV, chase rate. Like all those numbers were aligned. And if he can do that again in more of a sample, then you will buy someone, in your auction for $10, who's your second or third outfielder, who will be, come back with $35 value and be a top 10 player in the league.
Yeah, and I think one other consideration, I like Buxton where he's going. I think this is enough of a discount. I don't consider him a batting average liability despite what just happened. I think when you consider which positions to take your injury risk at, outfield always has guys who will play on the waiver wire. Always. Replacing an outfielder is not as hard as replacing other things. Third base, we'll talk about that. It's going to be so top heavy this year. If you lose a third baseman, finding another one on the waiver wire will not be as easy as finding an outfielder. So I think that also is that extra little nudge that makes me willing to take a chance on this profile. It's so strange to see projected playing time from Fangraphs coming in so high above what Buxton has done pretty much every single year of his career. The projections are all over 550 plate appearances. His career best is 511. If that happens, you're right. He's going to probably be somewhere between 30 and 40 homers with double-digit steals and as many as 20. That's the type of talent he has flashed. I'll take a chance on that. And maybe you need to get a little oatmeal earlier. Maybe Byron Buxton's the guy you double tap back-to-back. You go, I'll get my oatmeal. I'll get Bryan
Reynolds.
And then I'll come back and get Buxton to feel better about the Reynolds pick. Because now I got ceiling to go with the floor that I just drafted a round ago or maybe 2 rounds ago.
Not a bad idea.
So now I've made a case for both Buxton and Reynolds, which really wasn't my intent coming into the day. Seiya Suzuki really popped in the steamer projections. The Bat X just dropped as we record this here in the middle of January. And I look at Seiya Suzuki as a guy that does everything pretty well. I like where he's going right now. I think he'll probably stay in this range because you're looking at O'Neill versus Suzuki. Suzuki had injury issues of his own last year. Buxton, injury issues we talked about. And then it's a lot of other first-time players in this range. Jake McCarthy, Stephen Kwan, Taylor Ward. There's just not a lot of track record to fall back on for part of this group. It's like, do you want the guy that has done it for several years, or do you want one of these newcomers who could actually be on their way up into the top 100? I think it's a little bit tricky to parse that out.
Yeah, and the thing that I would preach for Suzuki, and this is a tough one, but we talk all the time about chase rate here. We love to talk about swinging at pitches outside the zone, and it is predictive of how good your OPS is going to be. It's useful in small samples. It tells you a lot about the player quickly. However, it doesn't always lead to better batted ball quality. There isn't actually a link between your chase rate and your batted ball. There's no correlation. There is a correlation if you start thinking about how much you swing in the zone. And that makes sense because barrels live in the zone. Like if you make a heat map of the zone, like barrels live in the middle. So you actually want to swing at the zone and not swing at the outside. And Seiya actually just doesn't swing. A good zone minus a good zone swing minus chase rate. So Z swing minus O swing on Fangraphs. A good one, top of the leaderboard is over 50, but a good one is over 40. He's at less than 30. I would like to see him be more aggressive in the zone. So that's something I'm looking for Suzuki. I didn't see it necessarily over the course of the season last year. If you're looking at the day-by-day graphs that they've got on Fangraphs, but I do think that could happen as he gets more acquainted with the league, because he now knows which pitches he can do damage on, and he's seen the league. So I do think that there is a potential that he's better this season. It is interesting. BATX 19 homers, Steamer 25. There's a difference of opinion there on the quality of his, the likelihood of his 11% barrel rate. One thing that I do know is that the BATX more heavily regresses small sample players, rookies, and small sample players than I think Steamer does. Steamer's a little bit more aggressive with small samples. And so I think Steamer is looking at that barrel rate and basically giving him a similar barrel rate next year, another 11% barrel rate, and some improvement on that power, whereas the BATX is still regressing because he's kind of like a prospect almost still.
Yeah, so I like Suzuki quite a bit. Part of the reason I would buy in, the barrel rate being 11% in his first year in the big leagues, that stacks up pretty favorably to a lot of other players that we're going to talk about throughout the episode. Does control the zone well enough, even with some of the maybe overly passive concerns that you brought up. Only 446 plate appearances last season because of injury, and a ton of guys in this range were lower than a full season's worth of plate appearances. And it wasn't just by like one stint on the 10-day IL that was on and back a couple weeks later. It was considerable missed time. What I look at when I'm trying to evaluate playing time is it based on roster construction? Is it possible for this player to be a 600 plate appearance player or a 550 plate appearance? You can kind of draw that line wherever you need to draw that line. But I think Suzuki at least has a path to be a max volume player. He can be the kind of guy that only gets the occasional day off. I think that's a big part of his appeal, because as we move further down this list, we don't have to go that far. You start to find guys who are legitimately going to be platooned, or they've got some kind of skills question where the bottom could drop out. And I think Jake McCarthy kind of fits into the conversation right here. When you look at stolen base projections for the upcoming season, doesn't matter what system you use, Jake McCarthy is going to be among the league leaders in stolen bases. Top 5, top 7, top 10, somewhere in that range. High 20s for steals. It makes sense based on his tools. I believe in that skill for Jake McCarthy as much as I believe in anything else he's going to do. Where it starts to kind of fall apart for me with Jake McCarthy is the power, right? I don't think I believe in the power at all. And you can see that reflected a little bit in the disparity between Steamer's projection for him and the BATX's projection for him. And we were digging into McCarthy a little bit before the show. When you go back to his minor league track record, you don't see a really dominant player at a lot of levels. You see a guy that was a little above league average pretty much everywhere, which is fine. But that always makes me wonder just how viable a player is going to be in the long run in the big leagues. And with McCarthy, we saw him for about 2/3 of a big league season last year. So it's possible the league hasn't necessarily figured him out yet, but that they will have a better plan for getting him out. And then, of course, with all of this too, the barrel rate for Jake McCarthy among the worst of the players we're going to talk about, under 5%, right? So that's in like Esteury Ruiz territory. So
yeah,
I'm just saying, like, there's some serious downside with Jake McCarthy that people might not be realizing for a guy at pick 120, pick 125.
Yeah, there's depth chart concerns. You're talking about Seiya Suzuki versus Nelson Velasquez, right? It's like we're going to take Seiya Suzuki if he's healthy. He's in there. He's playing. And when you're talking about the depth chart concerns in Arizona, you're talking about Jake McCarthy, Alec Thomas, who had better minor league numbers than Jake McCarthy, was more of a prospect, and now sits behind Jake McCarthy, on the depth chart now that Corbin Carroll is up. You've got, Lourdes Gurriel Jr. Like, you've got a lot of options there for players. If he slips at all, he's not a center fielder by defensive trade. He didn't play there last year very much, 12 games in center. And so the depth chart concerns are there. And then you start looking at the minor league points, and you were pointing out Reno is AAA. That's an extreme ballpark to the point where pitches don't even bend as much. And then you said Amarillo was AA. It's also a hitter's park. Those are the only two places that he's shown good power in the minor leagues. Otherwise, he's been actually sort of below average for power. And what he has shown is a good hit tool, really high BABIPs, sneaking the ball around. And in fact, I've watched enough Jake McCarthy that I believe in the hit tool. I actually believe in it a little bit more than the Fangraphs Prospects crew, which has a 40-45 hit tool. I think it's a plus hit tool. You start looking at those batting averages he put up despite some of the bad strikeout rates he had, the high batting averages and balls in play he had in the minor leagues. And Jake McCarthy, I've seen him do the kind of magic wand do thing, which that's like a term from Dwayne Kuiper out here, where I've seen him very much slow the bat down and poke the ball into left field as a left-hander, right? Like I've seen him sort of mean to go the other way, poke it through an empty infield. I've seen him do that enough where I like his hit tool, but is that enough? Like it might be the only thing he really has going for him offensively. If his chase rate is bad, his walk rate is bad, his swing strike rate is not good, his past strikeout rates are not good. You're talking about below average, swing decisions. You're talking about below average power, and you're talking about non-center field defense. If you're drafting Jake McCarthy, you really believe in that hit tool. It's a lot of pressure on that hit tool, and it's a hit tool that other evaluators have looked at and said was below average. So it's just saying this is not a top prospect on an outfield that has two top prospects and proven veteran on it as well. And by Fangraphs, his carrying tool is speed. And that is just the least valuable carrying tool. If you have one tool and it's speed, then that's not good. If you say he has a hit tool and speed, like I'm saying, that's still often profiles as like a fourth outfielder, like that's still not always a starting outfielder. Those are not always the two most valued tools in baseball today. So I agree with you that there's more collapse opportunity here than people might be realizing. I'm looking at the ADPs here, trying to find McCarthy. I can do that with a Control F.
The old Control F comes through again.
Jake McCarthy at 129 behind Nick Castellanos. Sure, I'll take McCarthy for the speed, like 1v1 against Castellanos maybe. Ahead of Kris Bryant. I don't mind taking him over the three that he's immediately sandwiched with. But there are people behind him, Santander, actually, Ian Happ. There's a guy who's behind him. Ian Happ is, let's see here, 30 picks behind him. And I will take Ian Happ. I mean, when we're talking about zone swing minus reach rate, Ian Happ was 14th in baseball last year. That was an improvement over what he's done in the past, and it's the reason why he's put together aggression with the eye he's always had. To have one of the best strikeout rate that he's had in his career. I could see him adding a little bit more of the power back in and having a sort of a 260 2010 season. That allays some of my worry about the stolen base production that McCarthy would be giving me. I would be getting some of that from Happ, and I just believe in him depth chart wise again. And I think Happ and Suzuki are fairly safe there.
Yeah, I think with McCarthy, the best case for him is saying, well, I don't know if I see anybody else with 25 plus steals that I actually think hits enough to stay in the lineup, right? If you don't believe in Esteury Ruiz later, you don't believe it's another bats that fall that are projected for that much speed. Okay, it's like the last chance at a player like that. But I'd rather just say, I'll get a guy that steals 10 or 12 bases or 8. Just get a couple guys that patch those bags together who have better offensive profiles overall. I'll pass on trying to get all those steals from one roster spot. That's more along the lines of my thinking. And Stephen Kwan sits right here too.
Steals, yeah. But also, like, is Stephen Kwan going to steal 28? It is interesting. He's maybe last chance saloon a little bit. I'm scrolling through. I'm at 150 now. There's definitely some 10s, Brian Hayes, Ian Happ, There's definitely 10s down here. Javier Baez, if you need to. There's 10s and 15s. Nimmo down here. But I am not seeing a guy that I'd say, here's 25, 30. Bellinger, if there's a complete like turnaround, but that's 184. So it's like 50 picks later and more of a reclamation project, a shot in the dark. Maybe Vaughn Grissom. He's actually slower than people think, though. There is a guy that goes 60 picks later than Lars than Jake right now. Lars Nootbaar. That here's a guy I've actually trained with. We've had our shirts off together. And I have to report that he looks better with his shirt off than I do.
Yeah, I mean, seems reasonable given your chosen occupations.
Yeah. So Nootbaar is maybe not going to steal 28, and he has his own, I think, depth chart concerns. And in fact, there's a lot of helium behind Nootbaar right now, maybe due to that fan base. I think he's the starter to start the season. I think it goes O'Neill, Carlson, Nootbaar, but there's Jordan Walker is just breathing. He's just, fire breathing. He's just knocking down the door. He's not going to come in and play third over Nolan Arenado. I did not see the kind of fluidity that I wanted to see out of Jordan Walker to think that he can play second. I think bringing him up to DH would be silly. But I suppose Dylan Carlson has not been as good as we'd hoped so far. And you could just run 4 good defensive outfielders out there every day and not play Juan Yepes that much.
Good.
Keep Tyler O'Neill healthier by playing him at DH some days. I mean, he's not a bad defensive outfielder, but just you could keep him healthier maybe. Maybe it's not as obvious a situation as Jake McCarthy, where the depth chart screams that Nootbaar is in trouble. And then the reasons that I like Nootbaar are we've got plus eye, plus contact, plus swinging strike rate, plus strikeout rate, plus barrel rate, plus max EV, plus chase rate. He's added bat speed in both of the last 2 seasons. He's training a drive line to add some more. He won't steal 28 bases, but I think he could steal 10 with the new rules. And so you're looking at a guy that I think could be very close to an old Cardinals outfielder, Tommy Pham.
That's a good fantasy player.
Tommy Pham vibes, young Tommy Pham. You were talking about a 25-year-old who's just about to head into his peak season. So there's going to be some hype machine around Lars Nootbaar. Some of it will be my fault. Some of it will be the fault of the things I just said. Some of it will be the fault of the Cardinals fan base voting him the 4th best right fielder on MLB Now. Over Tatis, it was pretty hilarious. Anyway, there will be some helium, and I think you just have to be careful to buy him at sort of 250 2010, and don't push the ceiling higher, because 250 2010 would be a great season for Lars Nootbaar next year. And if he does more than that, then good, but don't pay for more than 250 2010. I don't think.
Did you ever draft Stephen Kwan in his current ADP? Like a typical 15-team mix league. I mean, I understand
that was way above Nootbaar, right? Like was more by Jake McCarthy. He's like like 120.
It's like McCarthy, Stephen Kwan, and then Taylor Ward. 3 guys that we never would have expected to see sitting in this range together.
The alternatives are interesting in this pocket here. I could see maybe doing it because, although Hunter Green is 117, and I love Hunter Green. So if I could choose Hunter Green or Stephen Kwan, I'd have to have like 4 pitchers already if I choose Stephen Kwan. So it's going to be Hunter Green there.
Take a fifth pitcher, man. Don't take Stephen Kwan there.
I don't think so.
Get Hunter Green as your fifth pitcher. That would be my advice.
Is that fifth pitcher territory? 117.
I mean, if you're just going real,
10 rounds or whatever.
Well, you might have a few closers depending on how you play.
I would say even take Hunter Green as your third or fourth pitcher before Stephen Kwan. I don't know.
If the question is Hunter Green versus Stephen Kwan, just take Hunter Green and figure out how you're going to get the outfield sorted out later. That's
I think it's, the one thing is Kwan is a lefty and, he's going to be affected by the shift. The other thing is that he's going to go up and down as the BABIP goes, right? He's just going to do what the BABIP does. And he's not in line to help you in batting average. In fact, if you take him, you're taking a virtual 0 in batting average. Normally, when you take a virtual 0 in batting average, it comes with a lot of steals. He had 19 steals last year. Maybe he has more with it. He's projected to have a lot less. He did not have a lot of steals in the minors. So are you super into taking a 300 hitting, 4 homer, 15 stolen base guy?
I'm not into that kind of player. I think the stolen base downside is there. Yeah, the average is great. Playing time should be okay. I don't know what you're really holding on to if you're drafting him in this range, because it's one thing to take a first-time player there that does all the underlying things right. If he had a 13% barrel rate and we could look at all the underlying skills, the athleticism, and go, yeah, this totally makes sense. We're in. This is a guy
he only hit 6 homers last year, but he had underlying power that wasn't being shown.
I could tell myself a story with Jake McCarthy that he does keep his job. Like, that can happen. That's in the range of outcomes, and that he's going inside the top 75 next year. I can't even in my head make up a narrative that I believe with Stephen Kwan doing the same.
310-30.
And then you're going through this other kind of general thing. Are you passing on guys that have been very good or great in the past who at least are solid right now? I mean, Yelich, Castellanos for a bounce back, Kris, Bryant, they're all sitting there. I'm going to take Stephen Kwan over those guys. None of them. I'm taking all 3 of those guys: Yelich, Castellanos, and Bryant, coming off of disappointing.
I don't have a catcher yet, and we've got William Contreras, Sean Murphy, Tyler Stevenson coming up.
Just can't do it. Can't draft Stephen Kwan at that price. There's just not enough there that I like to justify it.
Yeah, and he won me AL Labor last year. Everyone makes sense at a certain time and then doesn't make sense. That's what I was saying about Lars Nootbaar. Like, I love him at 196 over Riley Green. I'll take Lars Nootbaar 999 times before I take Riley Green.
It's a lot of exposure. I'd be a little overweight on Lars Nootbaar shares.
Too many Lars Nootbaars, you get heavy. He's there against Jorge Mateo. There's your next 25 stolen base guy. So in fact, it goes from Jake McCarthy at 120 whatever to 202 and Jorge Mateo before you get another 25 steal guy, I think. Whit Merrifield at 192. But then you've fallen down the ugly tree. You've hit a couple branches on the way down the ugly tree. But Nootbaar, like right now, just like blows me off. Like he's just like off the page. Like, oh, that's the guy I'm taking in his range,
Right. Well, yeah. When it's Bader, Nimmo, Nootbaar, Haniger, Oscar Gonzalez, Cody Bellinger, he stands out. But then if he jumps and he's part of the Yelich, Santander, Castellanos, Bryant group, you're like, oh no, I like this guy, but these guys have all been really good.
Right.
I got to take these guys instead.
And that sort of describes like what I think like it's next year for Kwan. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like if Nootbaar has the season I think he can have, the next year he's going to get pushed up to a point where I'd be like, man, I don't think I can get Nootbaar this year. You know what I mean? Just like we had with Kwan. Like I had a fair amount of shares of Kwan last year because he was like a last pick,
Yeah.
And now he's 113. I'm like, I don't know. So you just watch these guys, and you have to sort of keep it in the pants, I guess.
Taylor Ward, what do you make of him?
Taylor Ward was. Let me see here. Taylor Ward had decent plate discipline. But Taylor Ward was on my list of guys that make contact and had a good barrel rate. And that list was pretty exciting. That list has, Harper and Soto and like Acuna on it. So a 21% strikeout rate and a 12% barrel rate for the season is a wicked combo. That's a really good combo. That should lead to a high batting average and high power, except then we see the sort of shape of his season. And if we're talking about being weirded out by the shape of Bryan Reynolds' season, then you should be weirded out by the shape of Taylor Ward's season. He had a 500 WOBA for the first 50 games of the season. And then he was flirting with 250 for the next 100 games of the season. And then he got hot at the end of the season again. And I don't really know why someone with the skills that he seems to have would be that up and down. I did talk to him, and I never published it, but I did talk to him about what his approach was. And I think he's a high ball hitter that learned to, spit on everything low. And that means not a very high chase rate. That's good. It should mean a high barrel rate because the high pitches go for better launch angles. He's managed to do it with a good strikeout rate. Maybe at some point they started throwing him low fastballs, and he had to show them he could do something on that. So the fact that he went back up again at the end of the season, I'm going to draft Taylor Ward. I really like guys who make contact and hit barrels. An 8.3 swinging strike rate on the year. I mean, he's a guy who could do what I just said for Nootbaar, except that he's way more expensive.
Yeah, I'm not expecting a whole lot for steals for Ward, but I actually think a lot of what he was doing last year is pretty sustainable. I think if you end up in a room with people like me who prefer Yelich to Ward and Castellanos and Bryant to Ward, and he's the last of the cluster still there, that's probably the best case I have for him. But like, am I just being a Brewers homer with Christian Yelich? Like, I know he's not MVP Yelich anymore. That's fine. He's still a good fantasy player.
Oh, I want to see his auction return value.
I bet it was in the low double, like $14 to $15 would be my guess.
Top 30 outfielder. Where is he? Why am I not seeing it? Oh, weirdest thing. Look at that.
Good.
$1 less than Stephen Kwan.
Okay. And then we've seen it for multiple years, 12, and we've seen it 16th. With a big ceiling too.
16th, $16, 16th player, tied with Ronald Acuna Jr. on value for the year.
Yep.
Just behind Marte and Stephen Kwan. Man. Yeah, why do we denigrate? He's not who he used to be, but 250, 14, 19 as a lefty who hits the ball on the ground and hits it fairly hard. Ooh.
Average could tick up a little bit, so you get a little extra value there. Even if the power doesn't come back, runs enough, doesn't have playing time risk, and I don't think the lineup's any worse than it was. It might even be a little better.
Yeah, I think it's better.
So RBIs could tick up a little bit too, although that could depend on lineup placement. They use them more like a table setter, then consider the possibility of another 30, 40 difference between the runs and the RBIs for Yelich. But I don't know. Like this is like Miami Yelich kind of 2.0.
And there's a little bit of good news there where his barrel rate and his max EV were higher than they were in 2021. Yep. Not back to MVP status there on either, but 117 max EV. This is a guy who hits the ball hard, and he pulls it a fair amount, and he hits it on the ground. I think he could really benefit from the pull rules, the new shift rules. So what if he hits 275 with 20 homers and 20 steals next year?
then he'll go inside the top 50 going into 2024.
And his auction value will be higher than it was last year because those numbers are higher, unless everybody goes up and he just stays the same. But still, he's not going right now as a top 20 outfielder, is he?
I don't think so. I think it's like outfielder number 30 by OBP or by ADP.
All right, we like him.
I try not to be a homer, but that just seems like pretty clear value from Christian Yelich in that spot. Santander is one of those guys that actually impresses me a little bit because he does what you were talking about earlier with Taylor Ward.
Yes, he was on that list.
Low strikeout rate, lots of barrels, and when you look more closely at how much Camden yards changed last year, it's actually really impressive to see Santander with a 33 home run season in that ballpark.
Yeah. And I've had him in some places where it's like, auto-new points leagues where, I got him for nothing because he doesn't walk normally. And last year he actually walked a little bit and was 20% better than league average with the stick. And I don't know if that's going to necessarily continue. It's not a walk-heavy profile. And the defensive numbers were not kind to him. And so there is a fair amount of playing time risk with him as the Orioles get better, I think. As a real life player, he's not amazing. But do I think Kyle Stowers is about to take his job? I think they have Nomar Mazara. No, Ryan McKenna. I don't think any of those guys are taking the job right now. It's somebody whose name I don't know that might take his job. You know what I mean? It's somebody lower down. That means they got to take a couple years to get there. So I think Santander's playing time is safe. I think even if he doesn't walk as many and he's not a good pick in points and OBP leagues, he's still going to be a good pick in batting average leagues.
Yeah. I think he's just a really solid option in this range. We mentioned Castellanos and Bryan a couple of times. I mean, Bryant, it's just health. A full season from him in Colorado. I think he can put up good numbers. Might be playing a lot of meaningless games this year and forever, but I think there's still enough there skills-wise where I really like him as a bounce-back candidate.
Castellanos is so weird because, projection-wise, I don't think – let me see what the auction calculator likes for Castellanos here. Santander's in the top 30. Taylor Ward's in the top 30 by projections. Christian Yelich is. I don't see Castellanos. Let me see on the next page. Oh, yeah. He's the 44th outfielder. So he's there's a lot of names that go behind him that Hunter Renfroe goes behind him and, is projected to be more valuable. Giancarlo Stanton, Nimmo, a lot of guys who go behind Castellanos. So by projections, it's not good. It's a 260-24 line, basically, by projections. And yet, he's been way better than that in the past. And we just saw a really good postseason run with the glove, but he hit 185 in the postseason. But he said he was way more engaged. And you have to think this Phillies team is going to be good. Except, did you know the projections don't really love the Phillies team still?
That's kind of strange.
It is. I think it is strange. If you just look at projected WAR, the Phillies are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12th team in baseball.
That's probably with a half season of Bryce Harper factored in, though, right? So
yeah,
tack on 3 more wins. How much do they jump up with that?
Yeah, with 3 more wins, they're 8th, right behind the Cardinals.
Seems about right.
I guess. I was about to say, what if Nick Castellanos and what if the Phillies are good and Nick Castellanos is more engaged and he has something that looks a little bit more like his old seasons? That's a lot of what ifs, man. You're gonna put money on that. You're gonna buy those what ifs. If I can buy him at projections, then maybe I'll buy them at projections and hope that he has a more engaged season. It's a good ballpark. He shouldn't have hit 13 homers on a full season like he did last year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I don't know why his walk rate was a career worst. His barrel rate was a career worst.
Chase rate was worse.
Yeah.
I think that's pressing. New contract. He was I was brought, you have to think of that like the player. I was brought here to to help this team over the top,
Maybe.
And I'm struggling. I mean, and you hear a lot of if you read Matt Gelb's coverage, during the season, he was down on himself,
I think there is a bit of a cliff, though, soon after this group. I would say, Yelich and Bryant for me are definitely ahead of Castellanos. I think he fits in this range. I would have a hard time choosing between Castellanos and Renfroe, who you mentioned, and even Giancarlo Stanton. We had a point last year, I think it was early in the year on the 3-0 show, where I asked you and Britt, is Giancarlo Stanton now somehow underrated? Did he go from a guy that people thought was probably a little better than he actually was to someone who's now underappreciated for the things that he actually can do really well? Because, of course, if you like barrels, and we love barrels, 19.2% barrel rate. It's the highest of any of the outfielders that you're going to find outside the top 100 overall. Not even close. Health concerns are definitely there.
But have they found a way to kind of manage his health concerns? I mean, 579 and 452 is not that bad.
No, over 1,000 plate appearances, looking at the last 2 seasons combined, probably puts him in the top 25%. So like the 75th percentile in playing time, maybe even a little higher. That's not bad. 30 home runs easily, plenty of RBIs, a little light in runs scored. Actually a good player to pair with his old teammate, Christian Yelich, because the runs and RBIs are in the opposite direction.
Yeah, he's going to be an RBI maker.
Mm-hmm. And this 211 average, it's a career low. That's not going to happen again.
Yeah, he's also 33, and any health concerns, strikeout concerns, batting average concerns are only going to be augmented as he goes forward. So you can tell why people just aren't as excited by him. Like if you could take Andrew Vaughn, you tell yourself, like the stories we tell ourselves about how Andrew Vaughn's going to get better and do all this. Like I wouldn't necessarily take Andrew Vaughn over Giancarlo Stanton, but I can see how it happens. Especially in this range, you think, I want to take someone that excites me, that I think could put me over the top. And you're not thinking I'm going to take someone who's going to be on my roster all year. This is he's at 145. Right around here is where you stop having players that necessarily are on your roster all year. It's where the worm turns, and the percentage likelihood that they're going to be on your roster all year starts dropping under 50.
Giancarlo Stanton has a barrel rate above 15% every single year of the StatCast era. That's awesome. That's amazing. That's very hard to do. People should geek out about that, and they don't. And I love it because that means I get cheap power in this range that's reliably there. I feel like I haven't bumped into anybody who's like, no, Giancarlo Stanton's still really good. He's one of the best values in the outfield pool. I think that's actually kind of what's happening here. I think maybe I'd
much rather take in the Hunter Renfroe, and
right.
I've taken him over Andrew Vaughn.
Yep.
I think I'm taking Taylor Ward and Santander have that, like maybe their batting average will be good, but I'm probably taking a pass on the Castellanos, McCarthy, Bryant trio.
Stanton hit 273 in 2021. He's the same dude. He's probably going to hit 240, but he could be back in the 260, 270 range again.
Yeah.
I mean, what are we doing? So he's 33. That's it. That's like the biggest argument against him. That's really it.
Is the team around him better?
It's not worse. Could get better with a few young guys.
Do you see the projection for Harrison Bader? The Zips projection?
Ooh, I want to see it because we're in that range, right? Bader's actually one of those guys that I keep getting tricked by every year. I keep looking at the positives and saying this is the year. He's quietly becoming the new Victor Robles for me.
I need to find this here. He just Dan Zaborski, he rolls them out like team by team, so they're not on the pages yet.
16 homers from the Bad X, 20 steals from the Bad X. I'll take that.
But check this out: 4.5 WAR from Bader from Zips. That's
a lot.
All-star. Now it's, I guess, a fair amount of his defense here, because he's only projected for he's projected for 4.5 WAR in 395 plate appearances.
But that almost sounds like something's broken.
That's crazy with 13 homers.
I don't know.
Oh, no. Okay, that's different. Down here, it's 395, 3.2 WAR. So he must have a
It's the
slightly
whole
different
position.
thing.
That's probably for like center
Yeah,
field as a group or something.
yeah. But if I mean, if he does this and has a 104 OPS plus and has the best defense on the team, he's going to play more than 395 plate appearances. If he plays more than 395 plate appearances, Harrison Bader, I think, will have the same kind of stuff that they're projecting him in other places. 16, 17 homers, 20 stolen bases, could be 25. I mean, he could be in that range that gets more. I've always liked him. The barrel numbers have really fallen off, though.
Yeah, a 1 year blip.
Chosen contact over barrels, I think.
But if it's like a 7 to 8% barrel rate, which is where he's been close to that for his career, right? 6.8% for his career, that works.
Yeah.
It's just a bet on health and playing time because his career high plate appearances is 427. That's lower than I would have expected because in my mind, Bader is that Gold Glove center fielder that is in the lineup as much as he's healthy to be in the lineup. He's a 600 plate appearance guy based on how good his glove is.
Yeah, I think these Yankees need that. They traded for him. They traded for him even when he was hurt. So they see him as the best center fielder. I don't think they want Judge in center that much. Aaron Hicks, I don't think can play center anymore after all the injuries. Florial is not really in Major League bat, I don't think. So Harrison Bader's the guy when he's healthy. I guess Judge sometimes, but I like Bader. Is this aggressive for that profile?
No, I think Bader and Ian Happ being right next to each other makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
And Happ is probably a lot safer because his OBP gives him more real life offensive value. That leads to more runs, more opportunities.
But we've already established that people will take more of a risk for more steals.
Mm-hmm.
And Happ is going to steal about half as much as Bader. So.
Yeah. See, I know that Stephen Kwan's floor as a hitter is much higher than Harrison Bader's floor as a hitter. This is where I'll give up some floor and take a chance on everything going right. And another part of this too.
That's what I'm saying. This is where you start taking chances because you'd rather get the upside of someone who actually contributes a lot to your team and then know that like this is starting to be where you might have to replace the guy off waivers.
You get the park factors boost too. We barely got a chance to see it last year because he was hurt when they acquired him. But Harrison Bader going from St. Louis, from Busch Stadium to Yankee Stadium, it's kind of nice for that offensive profile, especially when power can be that thing that's a little inconsistent from him.
Yeah, and maybe it's enough. That Andrew Benintendi said that in Chicago with the White Sox, he's going to spend the offseason trying to pull the ball in the air. I was like, wow.
Now he's going to try that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess, having talked to who was the oh my God, why am I my name failing? The Royals guy that was a big prospect, came up, struggled, went down, came back up, and was good. Went to the World Series with them.
Was the third baseman. Hosmer.
No, was the third baseman, ended up in the outfield.
Ended up in the outfield.
Royal.
Will Myers moved around, but he didn't play for them then.
No, a little bit older guy.
Yeah.
He was like their veteran.
The third baseman on that team.
He didn't come up. He didn't play at third in the end.
Oh. Well.
Hey, hold on.
Most challenging game of Guess Who ever.
Really? No way. It's going to be so obvious when I tell you.
You didn't give me that many clues.
Yeah, but that's a pretty good one.
He was on the World Series team.
I'm going to get there. Alex Gordon.
Yeah, okay. I gave you
enough clues. Anyway,
he's the other guy. Yeah, all right.
Alex Gordon said that when he came up, he was trying to pull the ball in the air. He was trying to hit for homers, and that park didn't reward it at all. And so he stopped doing that. And so there might be something to Benintendi getting to Kansas City and saying, I'm going to hit the ball on the ground a little bit more, I guess, make more contact. He did have some of his better strikeout rates While he was there, he pulled the ball less while he was there. But now that he's in a park that rewards it, maybe we get back to the 20 homers and 10 stolen bases from Benintendi. The park should aid his batting average as well. He has really good, contact plus patience ability. He's a left-hander, could benefit from the shift and from the stolen base rules. Like, it's not out of the question that he hits 270, 2010, 2015, and a little bit safer than Nootbaar.
He goes on 40, 50 picks later, too.
Really?
Yeah. Benintendi's not even in the cutoff for today.
228.
Yeah.
Oh, I just talked myself into Benintendi, dude. Sorry, I went off. I got unfocused there. We were in the sort of Bader, Haniger, Nimmo territory.
Yep.
Oscar Gonzalez.
I assume you're in on Haniger because the playing time ceiling is really high. They'll just let him go.
Like I said in another episode, I think Haniger and Conforto are the two guys that pretty much have to play as much as they can to make this team work, because they're going to be mixing and matching everywhere else, and so you can't mix and match everywhere. And so I think Haniger and Conforto are hey, if you're healthy, you're playing tonight.
And then there's Brandon Nimmo too. We should get Nimmo in here.
Nimmo is funny because he does not do that well on the zone minus O swing. He's like one of the best in the league at not chasing balls, but he's just very passive in general. And so you can actually sort of see in his profile, oh yeah, being passive and taking walks doesn't always lead to a high barrel rate. Like he has never really had a high barrel rate, but he has a good enough one that I can see double-digit homers. And he's a lefty batter, could benefit, with a 50% ground ball rate, could benefit from some of the shift rules. I don't know how far I'm gonna push the stolen bases.
He's like Christian Yelich without the steals. More average the last couple of years, but just in terms of where the power ceiling,
table setter, more runs than RBIs. It's an interesting profile. Plus, there's a lot of injuries in the past, and they're kind of that seem to me kind of reoccurring, doesn't it? Like hamstring injuries and stuff.
Yeah, soft tissue stuff rather than only things where it was a collision, it was a hit by pitch, like the more freaky type things.
Again, a lot of times I want to know why I'm drafting a guy, especially when you start building a team, right? And you're building a team, you're like, oh, I need homers, I need steals. Isn't that what happens, especially around pick 170, where you're like, you have needs, right? I'm not sure exactly what the needs are that Nimmo fulfills. He's not really going to give you power. He's not really going to give you speed. He might give you batting average, but he doesn't do it every year. And he should give you runs, but are you drafting for runs? How often are you at pick 175 being like, man, I really need some runs on this team? Maybe
not often enough, probably.
Right. Yeah, it's true. If you're using an auction, like you probably should be using one of those auction tools like RotoWire or whatever, because those sometimes can tell you that you have too many runs or not enough runs or RBI or whatever. And in a lot of leagues, you can't do trades. So you have to know, you have to build a balanced team. So yes, I could see picking Nimmo for runs at this point. I don't hate his draft value. What's the auction calculator? Is this this is 2022.
He's probably a $15 guy too. It's gonna be Yelich with
$11 right after Stanton.
Yeah, because
it goes Stanton, Nimmo, Hap.
Yeah, all right. So totally fine where he's going. A couple of guys that are tough before we close out the top 200. Really, just two more names we're going to get to before we sign off for this episode. Oscar Gonzalez. He's a tough player for me to figure out. Playing time, how stable is that? Skills, how much do we like what he's shown us so far?
Excuse me.
Big sneeze. Bless you. At pick 185, is Oscar Gonzalez a risk worth taking? I'm looking at the slugging percentages for this group. 461 is actually great among this cluster of outfielders. Only Buxton, Renfroe, Bryant, Ward, and Stanton are ahead.
The bat says it doesn't believe. The bat says a 148 ISO, 418 slugging next year. I think that's probably due to a soft-ish barrel percentage, a Brandon Nimmo-esque barrel percentage at 7%, without without a necessarily a big hard hit rate to go with it. The max EV though is decent, so I think the raw power is good. The prospects report on him just says 35 future value, which is tough. But and I think that has a little to do with why it took him so long to get here. He's 25 years old. He spent a long time in the minor leagues, and I don't know. I don't know that I believe, honestly. He got really lucky with the batting average on balls in play, and he's a righty, so it's not necessarily something I can be like, oh, maybe he'll regress and maybe the shift rules will help him. Like, I don't know. I'm not going to be buying him. A lot of times I use the bat more often than I use steamer. And these bat projections are not going to produce a number where I buy him.
I actually think the bat projections might help to lower the ADP a little bit. You might see Gonzalez fall outside the top 200 in these next few weeks because as people look more closely at him, they're going to have a lot of the same questions. He doesn't steal bases. Low walk rate is always kind of a scary thing because that can cost you playing time. You mentioned being a righty too. I think as the Guardians keep bringing up more young players, they can't all play in the middle infield. Guys get to move into the outfield too. So there could be more competition for playing time there than we're accustomed to seeing in the Cleveland.
Yeah, there's an
outfield.
interesting thing brewing even in the outfield depth chart with Will Brennan coming up last year, and Miles Straw having such a poor year. Will Brennan coming up, and then George Valera has his supporters and detractors in the minor leagues. But Will Brennan, 24-year-old left-hander with extreme contact abilities. On the Guardians? No way. And even worse barrel percentage, but in a smaller sample. But the one thing that is with these guys that put the balls in play, if he's the one getting lucky and Oscar Gonzalez is getting unlucky, it could be Brennan that takes his job. And then George Valera is actually a very kind of unguardian-esque player with a large strikeout rate and large power numbers. But Fangraphs has him as a 50 future value. There are other people who have him higher. There's some people who really, really love George Valera. A little bit of a step back in AAA last year to end the season, but a good AA season. And if he goes back to AAA and is 30% better than league average at AAA, he's going to come up and he's going to cause some situations on that depth chart too. So it's easy to sort of maybe strike Miles Straw and make him a fourth outfielder. He does have some aspects of that in his profile, and give Brennan or Valera center. But if Brennan and Valera both are playing well, that could put some pressure on Oscar Gonzalez. And then there's Josh Naylor, who can actually play some outfield. Josh Bell, there's some DH opportunities there. I think Oscar Gonzalez is fairly safe for playing time, with a lot of those things having to go right for other players and stuff going wrong for him. But the bad X projections for 3% better than league average. So, that puts pressure on his defense, which you remember some of the poor defensive plays Oscar Gonzalez made last year?
I do.
Yeah. So, I don't think this is a player I'm going to end up with a lot of shares of.
No, I think it's just not quite the right price and not quite the profile that I tend to go after. Last player for this episode as we close out the top 200 overall, Cody Bellinger. Are you buying a turnaround in
Taking Noot over him? Noot.
All right. Nootbaar goes ahead of him usually, so that's in line.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah, more recently he does.
We have different. I have back to like October on right now.
Yeah, January only. Nootbaar is a little bit ahead of Bellinger, like 10 to 15.
Oh, we already talked about him, I don't know, man. It's really rare for someone to have an MVP type season and then be this bad. And it's happened to two players, but Yelich is not this bad. So I don't know. He has a real uppercut swing, and he's really struggled to do anything about that high fastball, but he had the same uppercut swing in his MVP seasons, and he had figured out something to do with the high fastball. So what happened since? There's some good breakdowns about a foot injury as well as the shoulder injury contributing to this. Maybe he needs a new voice. It is interesting that he's finally on a new team with a new hitting coach. He's yet another year away from surgeries. So I might have some shares. He steals bases. If he was a little bit luckier with the balls in play and he's a left-hander, then if he hit, 230, 240 last year with 19 homers and 14 stolen bases, would we all think he's as much of a bust as he was?
No, because a 30 points in batting average wouldn't make you cringe the way that a 210 makes you cringe when you look at the slash line. And the other part of Bellinger, because of his defense and the position that he plays, his playing time is high. So even low in the order, and he'll move up in Chicago, right? Not as much talent in that lineup, so a more prominent spot. The counting stats were still good. 70 runs, 68 RBIs. That was good for last year.
$8 return value. Yeah. Tied with Whit Merrifield, ahead of Mark Canha, ahead of Giancarlo Stanton last year. What?
Your expected return in this range among outfielders probably isn't above $8 anyway.
I'm gonna have some shares, and I can't help myself.
No, and I think it's just acknowledging that you've got those 1 to 2 shots where you're going to take some legitimate batting average risks, and Bellinger's definitely one of those players. But if he gets the K rate down a little bit,
it's an argument against Schwarber, and who was the other batting average? We were talking about Tyler O'Neill. Like, don't. If you can take those shots later, then try not to take too many of those shots early.
There are quite a few ways that Cody Bellinger could go from being an $8 player last year to even just like a $15 player. And if you get a $15 player around pick 200, you're real happy with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
like Danny Jansen's down here, he might get 250 plate appearances as a second catcher,
Yeah, got a little more crowded in Toronto with Brandon.
Travis d'Arnaud is down here, like Josh Rojas right now may not have a starting position.
Bellinger does.
Yeah.
I think the other part of this is late enough where you should feel comfortable cutting anyone you draft in this range if they're just not playing well, not playing enough.
Yeah, if I said the worm was turning at 160, 170, by the time you get to 180, 200, yeah. These
know thyself, though.
They're not good.
Prepare thyself.
Yeah, prepare thyself for cutting them.
You have to, it's harder to do it when the player used to be as good as Bellinger.
Yeah.
If it's like Joey Meneses or someone else that's never been this good for a full season, you're like, all right, I was just wrong. Move on. If it's Bellinger, you're like, oh, but I don't want him to go off on someone else's route. It's the same sort of like prospect FOMO.
You know what, though? There is a good action item here for Bellinger. You need to know, you need something that you can see in a short sample and believe. Like someone who's missing power. Like if he didn't have the steals and you were like, God, I need Bellinger to get back to 45 homers, you could wait all year and then be like, oh, crap, he didn't make it. You know what I mean? Power takes forever to stabilize. So you can't look at slugging early and be like, oh, look, he has a 500 slugging. He could still go in the tank. But with Bellinger, with the steals and with the fact that he's had representative power, what you're looking for is the strikeout rate, and strikeout rate becomes meaningful really early in the season. So in the first 2 weeks, even you'll know a little bit. In the first month, you'll know more, and so a month into the season, you could, if he's striking out 28% of the time, cut him. It's not going to get any better than last year. Or start de-emphasizing him and put him on the bench and, at least, and maybe just cut him. And even the risk of losing an $8 player, if you see somebody on the wire, that's going to be better than that.
So let's say the cost is basically equal, and I'm giving you 10 rosters. Harrison Bader, Cody Bellinger. On the 10 rosters, you only get one. At each roster, you can only have one. You can't pair them. How many of those rosters would you put Bader on? How many of those shares would be Bellinger?
60-40, 70-30. And given cost, it might be 90-10.
Favoring Bellinger.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I like some things that Bader does, but he's been hurt. He's never shown the very high end of Bellinger. I think Bellinger will hit more homers.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. And when you look at their projections for WRC plus, they're both a tick below league average. So both play the same position, both have that batting average downside. I think I'm with you. I'd skew a little more towards Bellinger, even though I like both players. It is hard to roster both of those players because of those batting average shortcomings, unless you went real heavy with average throughout the early part or hadn't really taken on your batting average risk yet. But the outfield, not as bad as some people are making it out to be, but you do have to pick your spots carefully. We'll continue to do that in part 3, the final installment of our outfield preview. So a lot to cover.
It gets ugly.
It gets pretty gross, but we'll find some players that we actually like, some players that fill specific needs in that range. So be sure to come back soon for part 3 of our outfield preview.
Thanks for listening.